This is my little video discussion of the Condon reading about the community of Holmen in the actually Central Arctic, but technically in the ISR, which is Inuvialuit settlement region in the Western Arctic. So I still don't quite understand why they lump it that way politically. But anyways, I guess we're talking about the descendants of the Copper Inuit from the Central Arctic and not so much the Inuvialuit. But I guess we'll figure that out some time along the road. So here's a question. Critique the notion of economic security resulting from government involvement in Holmen on page 266. According to Condon, these programs have brought a degree of economic security to previously nomadic and subsistence-oriented groups, which by the 1940s and 1950s had been decimated by diseases, most notably tuberculosis and influenza, and economic impoverishment. Okay, that's a quote. First off, I think that many Southerners are quick to adhere to a kind of romanticization of the pre-contact Inuit life. This is not to say that the many areas of traditional life were not perhaps better regulated and possessed a higher degree of naturally regulated social and ecological equilibrium. But at the same time, I believe that it is very dangerous to blindly assume that a perfect way of life came to an abrupt end with European contact. I understand that I have to be very cautious being a European in the Arctic myself, but in the isolated realm of a largely value-free experimental world of science, I would like to seek honest critical thought without having to fear accusations of political incorrectness, right? So, I believe that Condon wants to point out that the very nature of a nomadic and subsistence-oriented group is one of relative personal instability. Even if the group at large survives a food resource bottleneck, it will potentially have cost many of its members their lives. So the group continues to exist because, hypothetically speaking, 2 or 4 survivors from the bottleneck can continue to reproduce and reestablish the group number over several generations. In retrospective, we may say, there you go. They lived in perfect harmony with the environment. They survived perfectly well. But coming from an individualistic standpoint, most members of the group did not survive. Families went through horrible agony, having to make terrible decisions. So, in the modern Canadian Arctic, this is not the case anymore. There is medical care available to all in every community. Food is always in availability. It may be argued that the very nature of this security has in many ways detracted from the potential life quality of Inuit. With less activity and more consecutive food intake, obesity has become a significant problem. Condon speaks of influenza and economic impoverishment. It is important to see that economic transitions were inevitable in the Arctic with global economy. It is nonetheless very much affected by it, and this impact is inevitable, as we can see in all indigenous communities from around the world. We must point out that Condon refers to a time period, the 1940s and 1950s and the time in between, by which time this economic and medical bankruptcy finds its beginning. He does not say, actually not beginning, because most of the influenza was in the 1910s and 20s, both on the East Coast and in the Western Arctic. He does not say that this 10-year period was in any way representative of traditional Inuit life, but at the same time, there is no turning the clock back. Globalization happens, and and in its wake, it kills. We may be speaking of environmental changes to draw a parallel. Globalization is transforming the globe in the same unstoppable way that our climate changes. Climate change has always been an issue in the Arctic, and hardly anyone has as much experience with it as Inuit. It is merely the recent accelerative rate at which temperature changes that poses the danger of outrunning the innovations or the innovative wits of human populations in terms of adaptation. This is likely what happened in the 1940s and 1950s in terms of social adaptation, and an equally unprecedented case in Inuit history. So what I mean to say is that at the same speed that global warming can overtake local communities in the Arctic, and at the same rate at which they may not be able to adapt quick enough, I mean, I hope they do, but even if they didn't, then that would be a parallel case to social adaptation. as when Europeans came into the Arctic at such a high rate. There was such a fast cultural adaptive challenge that they're pretty similar, the climate and the culture adaptation processes.